Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. So we're back with the Jeep today, out in the fields, because we've had a bit of a catastrophe with the old Joe's Motor Pool carburetor that I spent ages fitted. So I'm just going to quickly go through you what's happened and what I've done to solve this situation. Alright then, so what's been going on? So as some of you guys will know, 3 months back I had a failure on my Solex carburetor, started chucking fuel everywhere, and I decided to replace that with the proper Carter carburetor, and I decided to go for the Joe's Motor Pool one because I've always had lots of stuff from Joe's Motor Pool and it's always been really good. Well, as some of you also know, that was a bit of an arse to get the carburetor running, but when we finally did get it tuned just right, it was lovely. Jeep had tons of power, the fuel economy was as good as you could expect it to be on one of these, and that was way better than the Solex I had on before, and that was largely thanks to the staff at Joe's Motor Pool who gave me some help, because I was having some issues, I was underpowered, some backfiring and stuff, and they were helping me troubleshoot that, and I also got to learn how the carburetors worked and how to pull them apart and all that sort of thing. So it was a good exercise, and we ended up with a really nice running Jeep at the end of it. So we made a start to the season in 2024. We started doing some little events to test it, and everything started out really well. Jeep was running fine, loads of power, more than it's ever had since I had it, and we were all happy. But what I started to notice is, as I did each event and after each drive, the Jeep seemed to be getting a bit weaker again, started to lose some of that power that I'd gained. So I was like, well, there's something going on here, it's getting spluttery again, and you know, starting to have a bit of a nasty noise to it idling. Drives fine, but it seems to be losing power. Put the trailer on it and it was pretty gutless and getting worse and worse, and I thought, well, this isn't right. So then one day I was bored, I'd missed an event because I was ill, and I decided I'd just go for a little ride to the bakery like I often do, and on the way back I thought I'd bring it down the farm tracks and do a little bit of off-roading just to cheer myself up. And that's when the problem really started. So I was coming down this track that we see here. I wasn't very happy at all, that was spluttering and coughing, and I turned around to go home and I got round the corner, and as I went round the corner I slowed down, put my foot on the clutch to drop down into second gear, and when I put my foot, well, when my foot come back up off the clutch to re-engage, the engine was dead. It had just stopped completely. So I was like, oh God, I've damaged something because I've hit a rut too hard or something like that. Something's come loose, I've done some damage to something. So I had the old bonnet up and I had a look and everything was fine. And I was like, well, that's odd. And I turned the key and it fired straight back up right away. So I had the bonnet up and had a quick look and I couldn't see any damage. So I turned the key and it fired straight up with a little bit of foot on the throttle just to give it a bit of rev, and that was fine. As soon as I take my foot off the throttle, dead again. And I thought, oh Jesus, what's going on here? This is pretty bad. So I crawled at home, and every time that you put your foot on the clutch to change the gear or whatever like that, the engine would die within 1 or 2 seconds. Really bad. So that was only a little trip home, and that was dying literally at every stop. If I had to pull over for a car, the engine died. If I had to change down gear, the engine died. It was just a nightmare. So I had to properly crawl at home because I was just running like shit. So obviously that's not good enough, so I started inspecting what it could possibly be. Initially I didn't think it would be the carb, though I suspected it because that was a new part, but I thought we'd start with the smaller things. So we had the bonnet open and we looked at the points and cleaned them all up and played with the rotor arm and the distributor cap, cleaned them all up. I fitted new spark plugs, made sure the wires and everything were tight, you know, just to single out what it could possibly be. Fired it up, no difference at all, runs like crap. If it hasn't got choke or hand throttle going, it just can't idle and it dies. So I'm like, well, it's got to be the carburetor. And that leaves us in a bit of a pickle because I've only got about a week at this point before I need to use it again for another event. And I couldn't really afford to be buying another carburetor, so I thought, shit, this is a problem. Now, luckily for me, one of my good friends, he's by the name of Chris Golding, that some of you may have heard of before because he's well known in the UK military circle. He makes lovely replica machine guns, such as the 30 cal that's on my Jeep at the moment, although I do believe he's stopped doing that now. Anyway, he was coming to see me because he was bringing me an item that you haven't seen yet, and I'll cover at some point. But he saw my post on Facebook kicking off that my Jeep had broke down, and he said, well, I've got a brand new Solex carburetor that I've just tested on a Jeep that I was restoring, but I haven't used it properly. I'll bring that in with you and then you can bung it on your Jeep and see if that fixes the issue. So that's what we did. He popped over to deliver this other item, which you will be seeing at some point. And he dropped off the carburetor whilst he was at it. He said, bung this on the Jeep, you can pay me if it works. And I was like, brilliant, perfect, thanks a lot, Chris. Got me out of a lot of trouble. So here it is, the lovely new Solex carb that I've got. So like I say, initially this was just as a test. So I took the carter off, took the diffuser off the bottom because the Solex doesn't need them. Luckily I'd kept the old intake gasket from my old Solex, so I just reused that. I figured that would be good enough to do a test. Bolted the Solex on. I didn't touch it or adjust it in any way. I just put the choke cables and everything on, and I'm not lying, the Jeep hadn't been started for a good 5 days at this point probably. No choke, no hand throttle, just primed the pump, turned the key, fired instantly, and sat and idled with no choke or anything, completely happy. Now I have noticed one odd thing with these Solex carbs. My old one did the same thing, is that when it's completely cold and you hadn't used it for ages, they fire up immediately as long as they're primed, they're lovely. But when you've gone out and used them and they've got up to temperature, even if that's only say 4 or 5 miles, if you then leave them for about 5 minutes and then go to start them up again, at least on my Jeep, they seem to have this weird thing where they won't fire instantly. You'll crank and crank and crank for a little while, just a few seconds, and then that'll fire up. So I've only driven this a little way to get here, and I'm now going to fire it up just so you can see what it's like. But I don't necessarily expect it to fire up straight away. It may crank for a little while. There you go, and she's running and she's happy. But do you see what I mean? That wouldn't fire for a little while on the Solex. That wanted to crank for a bit and then it fired up. And I've noticed that was exactly the same on my old Solex as well. But now it's running. So I don't know what that's about, and if any of you others have experienced that, but if I now turn it off and then fire it again, that'll go immediately. So that's got to have something to do with fuel, I think maybe evaporating in a part of the carburetor or something. I don't know, that's very weird. Hopefully you don't mind my nice magnetic mount on its pink cover there. So that is where we're at now, guys. We've got the Jeep running again, and it's running nice. Doesn't have quite as much power as it did with the Joe's Motor Pool one for the very short time that it was actually running properly. But it is running and it's reliable. It's just a bit weird to start, but that must be a Solex thing. So any of you others, if you got the same carb, does your Solex do the same thing where if you get the Jeep hot and then go out and leave it for 5 minutes, that does that? If you run it hot and then you say stall in the road somehow or something, that will start immediately. But if you leave it for a few minutes, it does what you just see there. So we're all good to go again now. And what's weird is I've done a lot of fuel mileage test, and the fuel mileage seems to be quite good. I mean, I normally just keep the fuel tank full, you see, and I have a 1 gallon can, so I did a little test. I did a 40-mile run just to test the Jeep, and after I did it, I put a gallon back in to see how close that got back to where it was before we left. And this thing with this Solex carb is actually doing over 20 miles an hour, 20 miles to the gallon. I think that's doing about 23 miles to the gallon, which for a Jeep is pretty bloody impressive, and it certainly wasn't doing that on the car. Well then guys, where does this leave us, and why did I bother to make this video? Well, basically I wanted to do a little vlog showing you what's been going on, as I like to show people what this hobby can be like, especially when it involves vehicles being a pain in the arse, because that's something you need to know about if someone was seeing this who's thinking about getting into it. You're going to run into this sort of stuff all the time. But secondly, I want to speak about Joe's Motor Pool for a little bit. Now, in no way is this video a slight on them. Their customer service has been excellent from start to finish. When I was trying to set the carb up, they had multiple phone calls with me trying to diagnose why I was having certain issues with it that finally got sorted out. And when I started having this spluttering problem and then it not being able to idle, I contacted them straight away, obviously. And he went over a few things that it might be and was just talking to me about it. But I explained to him that I'd completely lost faith in the carburetor because of the trouble it was to get it going and then how short time it was before it conked out. So he told me to send it back. He just said, send it back. They'll try it on one of their Jeeps. If that's fine, if that's something I was doing, they'll sort it out and they'll use it on a Jeep that they're doing something on. If it turns out that was just like one part was faulty or something, they'll fix it, they'll use it, they'll give me a refund, no problem. I just had to ship it back to them. So they were brilliant like that. There was no arguments. That was absolutely fine. As soon as I told him that I'd lost faith in the carb and I had the Solex on it and that was running properly, so I didn't want to take that off, he was like, great, send it back, we'll sort it out for you. So that was brilliant. So Joe's Motor Pool customer service for me has always been fine. So I'm not having to go at the guys at all or trying to make out they're bad business. They make some brilliant products. However, when I took the carb off, before I sent it back, excuse the little plane if you can hear that, before I sent it back I thought I'd just disassemble it one last time to have a look and see what I can find inside it. But when I looked inside the fuel bowl, the entire fuel bowl around like the edge of it, the whole thing had like a sort of metallic, mega fine metallic dust in it. You'd like put your finger on it and you'd look and you'd have like a bit of a shiny finger. To me, what it looked like was the sort of metal dust residue you have left after something has been machined. Now, I can't think where that could have possibly come from out of my Jeep, because it's not out of the fuel. The fuel pump's not going to be putting stuff like that out, because if your fuel pump had ate itself like that, you wouldn't have a running vehicle. So then there's only a one pipe to go from the fuel pump to the carburetor, and that's been on there for plenty of time. That's not the sort of thing a pipe randomly starts doing, is putting fine shavings of metal down your carb. So all I can think of is that maybe at some point when the carbon was machined, when they were drilling holes internally and stuff like that, for some reason there was some residue left in, and when I started using it, maybe that got into the fuel bowl somehow or something like that. I can't explain it. And like I say, you're not going to get metal residue out of petrol. You're not going to get tons of fine metal residue out of your fuel pump, because that doesn't make sense, and your fuel pump would be dead. And the pipe's perfectly clean. And before I fitted it, I flushed the pipe out thoroughly with brake cleaner, so that's not going to be coming out the pipe. All I'm saying basically is Joe's Metal Pool makes some great products. I know people who've got the carbs and they've just put them on without touching them, and they've had them for years and they've been fine. But I also know people who've had their carbs and they've, the same as me, ended up sending them back, or they've had a lot of problems and had to change parts out. So, and whilst I was in Normandy, on a slightly different note, I spent one of the days in one of my friend's Jeeps, and we'd been having problems with the Jeep all week. And it turns out that what the problem was a set of brand new points from Joe's Motor Pool. We ended up breaking down on the side of the road in a really bad place, and we had to put the old points back in, and then the Jeep was fine for the rest of the week. And that was a brand new set of points. So I'm just saying, like with all reproduction stuff, there can be mishaps. I don't know if it's quality control or anything like that. But I'm not slighting Joe's Motor Pool. The guys are great. They're mega helpful. Most of their products are brilliant. But personally, I won't buy another one of their carbs. At some point, I will take the Solex back off. I'm going to definitely keep it. I've paid for it, and it runs lovely, but I will take it off at some point, and I'm going to buy a different carter carb in the future, a seal tested one, which I'll get from Cliff at Universal Jeep Supplies, and I'll see what that runs like. Hopefully that'll be brilliant, because I would like to have the Jeep how it should be, but we'll see how we get on with the Solex and see if that keeps running nicely over time. If the Solex conks out in the same way after so long, and then I look inside that and that's got this same residue, then I'm in the shit and there's something going on, and I will obviously be owing Joe's Motor Pool a bit of an apology. But they've been great. They gave me my money back straight away with no questions. They understood that the carb had been apart multiple times, so it wasn't like as new, but they didn't mind. They're like, we'll sort it out for you. And their policy was, we're not going to mess about with stuff like this, because you've shopped with us lots, people shop with us loads. We'd rather just have this back, keep you happy, you know that we aren't messing you about, and then you will keep shopping with us in the future. And that's brilliant, because some of their products are top notch, like their metalwork and stuff and all that is fantastic. So again, I'm not slating Joe's, I'm not saying their carburetors are all crap. This is just my personal experience, and I thought I'd share it with you guys. So on that note, I'm going to stop waffling on. Hopefully this has been helpful to, or at least interesting to some people. If you do like my content and haven't already, please give me a subscribe. That helps me greatly so that other people can see my stuff, and hopefully that'll help them as well. So chuck us a like and a subscribe if you haven't already. Leave comments and questions in the section, and I will always get back to people as soon as possible. You can tell me that I've done something stupid and that I'm a useless twat, or whatever you want. I'm not going to take offence, I'm not that sort of guy. So thanks a lot, and I'll see you next time. Now let's see if you want to start up and actually drive away smoothly, unlike last time when I made a twat out of myself. That'll do us. See you around.